Greetings. We're going to continue with our previous topic from the previous video, and that was the checklist of factors that you can use to evaluate the information source as you're doing your research. So by the time we conclude that video, you're left with 3 factors, that is accuracy, reasonableness, and support. So we're going to concentrate on those factors in this video. So to start with accuracy. So the goal of the accuracy test is to ensure that the information is actually correct, up-to-date, detailed, exact, and comprehensive. Keep in mind that something that was true 20 years ago may not or may no longer be true today. And this is especially true in fact-changing fields like medicine and technology and others. So except the information being up to date, it should also be comprehensive, or it should be complete, not partial. Because for you to make your judgment, you need information that is complete. So that's why accuracy looks at time and the comprehensiveness of the information, the exactness, and then the details. So we are going to look at some indicators of accuracy. What can you use as the indicators of accuracy of a certain information source? So number one thing is timeliness. That is the first indicator, timeliness. So this is the measure of how up to date the information is. In many disciplines like science, medicine, and technology, like I've said earlier, timeliness is a very important issue of the relevance of information and therefore its accuracy. So since new discoveries are constantly being made and the facts about the subjects are constantly changing, you need to be careful to note when the information you find was created and then decide whether it is still of value or not. So all information is not necessarily bad, but it is more effective, or it would be better for your research purposes, the accuracy of your research purposes, to use up-to-date information or recent information. Though some work is timeless, such as philosophical work, it may not be affected by time, but in many cases you want only the most accurate and up-to-date information that you can find. So second is comprehensiveness. So the ideal article or website presents a thorough discussion of the subject as opposed to only touching the highlights. Because as you're making a research, you're not interested in highlights, you're interested in the details of that particular topic. And knowing that no one can read 2,000 articles on the same subject before coming to a conclusion or making a decision, and no single piece of information will offer a true complete story. So that's why we rely on more than one source, and that's why we try to find a variety of sources in different formats like books, scholarly journal articles, and materials from online databases. Then the third indicator of accuracy is lack of a bias. So by addressing all sides of an issue, the author ensures that you have a complete and objective treatment of the topic. Biased information is not completely useless, but the bias must be taken into consideration when you interpret and use that information. So those are the indicators of accuracy. So we are going to look at the indicators of possible lack of accuracy. So what can you base on to say that actually this information source may not be accurate? So number one indicator of possible lack of accuracy is a source that deliberately leaves out important facts, qualifications, consequences, or alternatives. So such a source may be actually misleading or even intentionally deceptive. Then second, vague or sweeping generalizations, such as opposed to facts and figures, like when the author is making generalizations instead of exact facts. Then the other thing is that information that has no date that is being that there is no date on the document, or a very old date, particularly when the information actually is time sensitive. Then another thing is a very one-sided view that doesn't acknowledge opposing views or respond to them. For example, a gun rights website that promotes guns ownership and defends it but does not address the societal problems resulting from gun violence, or information pretending to be objective but possessing a hidden agenda of persuasion and hidden bias, is among the most common kinds of information in our culture. So meaning, as you make use of the information sources, it is very important that you filter what you actually consume, more especially when it comes to the internet, just like we discussed earlier on when we are starting to look at these factors. So the other factor is reasonableness. So reasonableness is the measure of reasonable information. The measure, when you talk about reasonableness, and we look at the measure of reasonable information, like the measure of how the measure of reasonable information lies in its fairness, objectivity, moderateness, and consistency. That is, when we are to measure the reasonableness of a certain piece of information, we shall focus on its fairness, objectivity, moderateness, and consistency. So when you are to look at the indicators of reasonableness, what can you base on to say that actually this information source is reasonable? So number one thing is fairness. You look for a balanced and well-reasoned argument. So the tone of the article should be factual and thoughtful. A good information source will possess a calm, reasoned tone, arguing or presenting material thoughtfully and without attempting to get you emotionally worked up. So pay attention to the tone, and especially conscious of highly emotional writings. Then the second one is pure objectivity. So pure objectivity is almost impossible to find, but a good writer should be able to control his or her biases. You need to be aware that some individuals and organizations are naturally not neutral. So you should be able to look out for biased or politically distorted work. Then the other indicator of reasonableness is moderateness. That is the test of information against how the world really is. So moderateness, you're testing this information against reality. So you use your own knowledge and experience to ask if the information is really likely, possible, or probable. So keep in mind that most information is ordinary and not likely to cause great excitement. If you find claims that are surprising or difficult to believe, or which otherwise deviate from your own knowledge and experience, use caution and demand more evidence than you might require for a lesser claim. Because it is important to remember that some truths are in fact spectacular and immoderate. And don't automatically reject a claim also simply because it is astonishing. Just be extra careful in checking it out. The other indicator, the fourth, is consistency. So the facts and findings in an article or website should not contradict themselves in other parts of the same article. That is, the author should not contradict himself in different parts of the article. The information should be consistent throughout. So sometimes when people spin falsehoods or distort the truth, inconsistencies or even contradictions show up. So we're going to look at some indicators of possible lack of reasonableness. So number one indicator of lack of reasonableness is overly aggressive tone on the part of the author. That is, when the author is overly aggressive. For example, let's say referring to the opponents, when the author refers to the opponents as stupid jokes or belittling findings not in accordance with his own. So anytime a writer puts himself or herself in the way of the argument, either emotionally or because of self-interests, this often indicates a lack of reasonableness. Then the second one is overclaims. That is when the language is too grandiose or hyperbolic. For example, when someone says thousands of children are murdered in this country every day, so it's actually not like it's over exaggerated. Or someone may say this is the most significant piece of medical research ever. You get? So you see? Or someone can say more than half of the Americans have had their cars stolen, or more than half of the Ugandans have had their cars stolen. So something like that, like it is over exaggerated. So such information uh, that shows over claims. So these sorts of statements are seldom, if ever, backed up with supporting evidence. Then the other thing is sweeping generalizations. When the author generalizes, for example, someone can say it is obvious to everyone that, like when someone is making generalizations, which may not be necessary, maybe, and then data that contradicts itself. When the information on the in this information source is self-contradicting, then it is another indicator. Then the other thing is conflict of interest. Let's say someone says, "Welcome to the Old Dodgy Tobacco Company homepage. To read our report, cigarettes make you live longer." Something like that. So, like it is, how can you say that cigarettes make you live longer? Yet it is obvious to everyone they don't. So something like that. Or when someone says the products of our competitors make the products that our competitors make are dangerous and bad for your health. So such things. Then the other factor that you can look out or use to test to evaluate an information source is support. So support, mostly when we talk about support, um, uh, let's say in most information is presented in an article comes from other sources. Like for example, the information presented um, in articles comes from other sources. So you need to ask yourself, where did this information come from? What sources did the information creator use? And is there any bibliography or other documentation? How does the writer know this? It is especially important that statistical information be documented. Otherwise, someone may be just making up numbers. So by properly citing and acknowledging sources of information, an author strengthens his or her credibility. So when it comes to authors, you have to note that most times it is very important for credibility that you cite your information. So that is one thing you need to know. So what are the indicators of support? One, collaboration. So you have to see that you have to check, do other sources agree with the information in this source? So collaboration or confirmability is an important test. Whether you're looking for a fact, an opinion, or some advice, it is a good idea to triangulate your findings, or let's say you find at least 3 sources that agree with each other, that agree with each other about that particular topic. So if your sources do not agree, you should do further research to find out the range of opinion or disagreements before you actually draw your own conclusion. So that is an important thing. Then the second one is external consistency. So you also need to compare what is familiar in the news source with what is familiar in other sources. So what is there in common between this source and the other sources? That is in form of information. Now, where these sources discusses facts or ideas that you already know something about, does the source agree or harmonize with other sources, or does it conflict, exaggerate, or distort? So the reasoning is that If a source is faulty where it discusses something you already know, it is also likely to be faulty in areas where you do not yet know, and you should therefore be conscious and skeptical about trusting that source. The third indicator of support is claims made in the article being supported by facts or figures, the source of which is clearly noted. That is when the author uh, puts sources of information like facts and figures, like he puts a source for the source of that particular piece of information. Then proper documentation, that is the fourth indicator, is proper documentation and citing of the sources for facts and statistics used in the article. That is a bibliography or list of references or works cited at the end of the article or website. So that is another indicator. Then let's look at the indicators of possible lack of support. That is when the website does not have any supporting sources for its information. Number one, numbers or statistics being presented without any identified source for them, when they're just listed but does not cite any source. Then absence of source documentation, when the discussion clearly calls for such documentation. Third, you can't find any other sources that present the same information or acknowledge that the same information exists. That is when there is lack of collaboration, like we looked at what collaboration is. But when there is lack of collaboration for the particular piece of information on that source. Fourth, claims, when claims are made by the author but are not supported with evidence. So those are the possible lack of support, and that has marked the end of this video and the end of the factors that you actually may use to evaluate an information source as you do your research. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned. Share with friends that you think may need it. Like if it has been useful, hopeful, and subscribe for more, and let's keep in touch. Thank you.